All right, hey guys, we're back in the newsroom here on this, I gotta see what the date is. It's Tuesday, May 29th. We're happy to have you here on Fox 5 Live. Welcome to the show. My name is Molly. I'm here inside the newsroom at Fox 5 DC after the long weekend. Hope that you guys had a very memorable, meaningful Memorial Day, safe weekend at that, and are ready to get back into the news this week. It's dreary, a little bit gloomy here in DC, a little humid this week. Unfortunately, the weather's not going to be in our favor perfectly, but today a couple of top stories we have going on right now. Santa Fe High School goes back to school today. It was an emotional return for students, and we have some of that footage this morning that we streamed early on our social media sites from the students returning to school. Also, a big hot topic today, Starbucks closing 8,000 of its stores for racial bias training. We knew about this a month plus ago. I actually went this morning. Ironically, I actually totally forgot this was happening. And then I saw the sign on the door. It's closing, I think mostly around the country, the 8,000 stores around 2 or 2:30 p.m. in that time zone of wherever the store is. So it's a little more than 8,000 stores are closing for this training. They're happy to announce this with a sign on their front door saying that they'll be reopening Wednesday at 5:30 a.m. depending on when their location opens. But just an interesting thing, urging its workers and managers to discuss racial bias. And this, of course, all followed the arrest of those two young men in Philadelphia. I think we're hoping to have our sister station in Philadelphia get some sound and some footage from what's happening in Philadelphia as regards to the closing of the stores there, as this all stemmed from that arrest of those two African-American men in Philly. Meanwhile, we're going to get on with today. If we have anything breaking, any video that comes into us, we're going to make sure we show that to you. I want to show you some of the top stories today that are happening. Really, this is more of a regional, maybe even national story, but Ellicott City again, Ellicott City, Maryland, flooding for the second time in a couple of years now. In 2016, they went through those massive floods. Lots of businesses on Main Street were really decimated, had to close. It was a horrible time for that city, for the Baltimore region. And this Sunday, it broke again that some of those waters and those streams were flowing into Main Street again. Some of those small businesses obviously affected by that. And we have some sound from some of those people. So let me get right to some of the top stories and show you what's going on, starting with the story from Ellicott City. Our reporters, Lindsay Watts and Evan Lambert, talked to some of these business owners Sunday, and we have some sound from them from yesterday. So let's listen in and give you sort of a general scope as to what's happening. And then when we do have cameras down there today, if we do have some more live stuff coming in, we'll show you that along with the rest of the stories that come in today. I'm looking at my screens right now to see what is going on. Let's go right to our top stories.
This was the scariest.
The last time her antique store was flooded and destroyed, Joan Shea Cohen had already left for the night. This time, she was inside her new location on Main Street as the rain poured down.
The water was coming in the front and from the back.
Joan was in the shop with her friend Gary. The weekend before, she had moved everything out, fearful of the storm.
U-Haul vans, trucks, furniture out, smalls out, everything, okay? And then we brought it back starting last Sunday.
She had just gotten everything back inside.
And the floor started to buckle and the showcase came down. This huge 6-foot wide, 6-foot tall show came down. All the furniture was moving. The floor had buckled. And the water's getting higher and higher. Gary, I don't want to drown in here.
The door was stuck, so they broke a window to escape into the flooded street.
We were basically swim walking, and I thought, this is it. We're going to end up drowning in this river. And Gary said, no, we're going to be okay. We're going to make it. We're going to make it.
They took refuge in someone's apartment, surviving with just a few scrapes. A day later, Joan is grateful for her life, but devastated to lose her business yet again.
I am 73 years old, but I still have lots of energy.
This was the last time we talked to Joan after the flood in 2016. Back then, she was already thinking about reopening her shop.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to my new venue of Joan Eve.
Like so many Ellicott City business owners, she did reopen, excited for the future of the city she loves. Now she says she can't fathom going through this again.
I don't know what to say is going to happen to Ellicott City. I don't. It's not going to be me there, though. I don't think so. I can't go through this again.
Been my best friend for as long as I can remember. Joseph Lopez has known National Guard Sergeant and Airman Eddison Hermond for 21 years. They were with friends at La Palapa Mexican restaurant on Ellicott City's Main Street when flood waters turned the surrounding streets into rapids. Lopez says Hermond went to help a woman trying to escape the flood with her cat.
The parking lot basically turned into a river at that point, and he grabbed the cart, she pulled it back, and he slipped, and the current kind of took him into it was kind of a man-made river out there, took him into the river, and that's the last anyone saw.
That was around 5:30 Sunday night. New video from a drone and the ground on Main Street shows the disaster zone where officials have painstakingly searched for Hermond, who has a teenage son.
We're continuing to search for the missing gentleman. Nothing is off the table, so we're looking and not concluding any assumptions.
Lopez says friends are trying to remain hopeful. Some comfort coming from the selfless act Hermond attempted before being swept away by the water.
Like he'd do that for anyone. He's done so much for me in my life, and that's just him. I mean, he's served in 2 branches. He was an Air Force guy, he was an Army guy. Just really an amazing guy.
Well, this effort has been hot and cold, but both sides seem to be expressing new optimism now that this summit may in fact happen, even though it's just 2 weeks out. This is what it's come to. Following this guy in a white shirt through the Beijing airport. Kim Young-chol is a top North Korean official, possibly on his way now to the United States. In fact, he was just sitting at Kim Jong-un's side on Saturday during a meeting with South Korean President Moon Jae-in, the same day that President Trump indicated that a summit may still happen.
It's moving along very nicely.
Moving along nicely, perhaps, and a U.S. delegation has been talking with North Korean counterparts. But the same issues that led President Trump to back out of the summit once could crop up again. Is North Korea really ready to deal and give up the country's nuclear program?
We want the North Koreans to dismantle their program immediately. The North Koreans want to dismantle their program never. So, yeah, there's a difference in timetable.
And those are the sort of issues that will have to be worked out before a Singapore summit. And there are other players as well, especially China. And that's where more U.S. pressure could come to bear.
What has to change? China has to see North Korea not as an asset, but rather as a liability.
And we have seen President Trump suggesting that China may have been encouraging North Korea to take a much harder line approach. In Washington, Doug Luzader, Fox News.
A hero's welcome for Josh Holt, the 26-year-old landing in Salt Lake City with wife Tammy, almost 2 years after they were thrown into a Venezuelan prison. It's been a long, painful ordeal for the Holt family.
So much anxiety and everything has just been lifted off my shoulders.
But when he got off the plane Monday night, all the turmoil and strife was briefly forgotten.
We're grateful to be here. We're grateful to finally be around for our families. And once again, we thank you all. We love you all.
Many of Holt's well-wishers were there at the airport, his grandmother draping an American flag around his shoulders as supporters broke out in the national anthem. The saga began in June of 2016. Holt had traveled to Venezuela to marry Tammy, who he'd met online. Shortly after, the couple was arrested, accused of stockpiling weapons. Holt's imprisonment led to lengthy negotiations between Venezuela and U.S. officials, culminating in his release this weekend. He was flown to Washington, where he was checked out by doctors and praised by President Donald Trump.
Just so grateful for what you guys have done and for thinking about me and caring about me, just a normal person. So it really touches me, and thank you.
You've been very brave, actually. You've been incredibly brave. We saw what was happening inside of that prison. So you really have been very, very brave.
Physically, Josh Holt is said to be doing fine given the circumstances, but emotionally, loved ones expect it to be some time before he returns to normal. In Los Angeles, Alicia Acuna, Fox News. Hurricane season might not officially start until Friday, but for people along the Gulf Coast, it's already here. Almost on cue, Alberto made landfall Monday with winds topping 60 miles an hour, kicking up angry waves and dangerous rip currents.
The currents kind of pulled me in. It was pretty scary. I started seeing black spots.
Cell phone video captured a waterspout at a hotel pool in Panama City. As predicted, the storm pounded the panhandle with torrential rains. Floodwaters quickly filled this Tallahassee area cafe and submerged roads in Dauphin Island.
Anytime you get a tropical storm or hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico, if it gets anywhere close to us, this is the type of situation we can have.
Even with the forecast calling for severe wet weather, plenty of residents were still thrown by the storm's intensity.
I would recommend not going in the water.
But for surfers along Pensacola Beach, the rougher, the better.
Like being in a washing machine would be the best description I'd give you.
The storm has weakened as it moves over land. It's got the southeast in its sights, now expected to target Alabama and western Georgia. Alberto's outer bands stretch all the way to the Carolinas, where a local TV anchor and photojournalist were killed when strong winds brought a large tree down onto their van. Alicia Acuna, Fox News.
For the second time in less than 2 years, this is Ellicott City, Maryland.
Well, you always pray that it's not going to happen again. Every time it rains hard, you say a Hail Mary and hope it's not the time. And here we are. It was the time.
Rescue crews say they're searching for Eddison Hermond. Police say he was last seen at a restaurant here on Main Street. Much of that street is now covered in mud or washed away. From beneath this small bridge, crews pulled a dumpster, a tree with roots, and 3 cars. They cleared this field of about a dozen flooded cars. Weather services report about 8 inches of rain fell over a few hours Sunday afternoon. Residents and business owners say the flash flood it created was more destructive than the flood in July 2016. That killed 2 people and caused tens of millions in damage.
We will be stronger in the future. We really will, folks. I mean, this is not a place that gives in. And we didn't give in 2016. We're not going to give in 2018. So I want people to know that Ellicott City is strong, and we're going to continue to be strong.
Maryland Governor Larry Hogan has declared a state of emergency. He had just announced federal funding of more than $1 million to help restore the downtown from the 2016 flood.
So now here we are again, and it's sad, but I said to my husband, is this our new normal? Is this what's normal now? It's for us every couple of years to have to dig this place out.
And Timothy Konjerski said a few weeks ago his brewery had just finished repairs. He says he'll rebuild again.
In the end, our real resources, our people, a building is stone and brick and metal. That can be replaced, people can't. And that's the real resource here.
Local authorities say they performed about 300 rescues as a result of last night's flooding. The task of restoring power and cleaning this all up continues. In Ellicott City, Maryland, Rich Edson, Fox News.
At a Medal of Honor ceremony last week, the president honored Navy SEAL Britt Slabinski for his actions in Afghanistan shortly after 9/11, a failed attempt to set up an observation post nearly 11,000 feet above sea level over an area where al-Qaeda fighters were operating. Air Force Tech Sergeant John Chapman was among the 7 U.S. service members killed that day after a series of mistakes on what is now known as Roberts Ridge. Chapman was shot returning to find Navy SEAL Neil Roberts, who slipped and fell out of their helicopter. Initially thought to have been fatally injured, Chapman was left by the retreating SEALs, but appeared to fight on alone. The Air Force, which has not received a Medal of Honor since Vietnam, has been pushing to award Chapman the nation's highest medal for valor.
We know now from those Predator feeds that John Chapman was not dead, that he got back up, he kept fighting, he killed additional enemy forces.
For years, former Air Force Secretary Deborah James pushed for Chapman's Air Force Cross to be upgraded.
He paved the way for the safe entry of the reinforcing forces that were coming in to follow on to the battle.
New evidence, the result of improved technology and analysis of images fed back from a drone flying above the attack site, suggests that Chapman fought on for more than an hour after the SEALs left him. The Air Force does not blame team leader Britt Slabinski.
I think he did his absolute level best on the worst day of his life.
Former Army Delta Force operator Jim Reese was in the Operations Center in Afghanistan watching the video live.
Being privy to those feeds that I was privy to during the operation that night, seeing someone shooting when those Rangers were coming in, yes, I believe Chapman was alive.
The SEALs say they did not know Chapman was alive when they retreated.
I do believe Chappie was fighting up there. His resiliency, he probably passed out initially, came back up. What Chapman did was above and beyond because he was the last one on that mountain. So, as we say, though I be the lone survivor.
At the Pentagon, Jennifer Griffin, Fox News.
So those are some of our top stories from the day. Of course, the Ellicott City, Maryland flooding, just extremely sad, disastrous situation there. We do have a couple photojournalists in the newsroom who covered that story a couple years ago, and they saw the damage and the flooding from a couple years ago. Now, of course, just a year and a half-ish later, similar situation. So they're working on how they're going to rebuild there. Going over to some quick breaking news that we have, guys, right now. Check this out, an aerial scene of a bus crash. This is in Pittsfield, Michigan. Unfortunately, we're hearing, according to reports, that there is 1 dead, 7 injured in this crash. Again, in Pittsfield Township in Michigan. This is a school bus crash on what is their eastbound I-94 route. The fire department and police responded to this scene, and the bus was being provided tow assistance for a flat tire. But you can see, luckily, according to the report, there were no students on the bus at this time, but they did note that the driver of the vehicle, including 3 infants inside, were trapped after crashing into this school bus. So again, someone driving the vehicle, 3 young children or infants inside the vehicle crashed into the bus. You can see the damage there. And those 3 children were transported to nearby hospitals to be seen. 1 is dead in this situation. So it's extremely scary aerial view right there of Pittsfield Township, Michigan. Unfortunately, motorists are being advised to avoid the area. We're going to let you look at this for just a second as we get that information up on your screen. Again, guys, quite a scary scene there in Pittsfield, Michigan, where you're seeing right now on your screen a live aerial view of this the vehicle that crashed into the school bus. Now, luckily, there were no children on board of the school bus, but 3 young children and or infants, according to reports, were in that vehicle that you see totally squashed, really, by that bus on the side of the road. Those people were transported to hospitals. We are told that there is 1 fatality in this crash in Michigan. So again, just a horrible, scary close-up of this scene in Michigan in Pittsfield Township, reporting this crashing here. So we are going to kind of keep tabs on this and kind of watch it as it evolves, if anything else changes. But I want to take you to another story as well. We're covering a lot of things here today. And remember last week we were talking about the shooting that occurred in Noblesville, Indiana, another school shooting that sort of started but was thwarted by a security officer, or a teacher rather, who was there in the school. Yesterday, in case you guys didn't hear about this, we're going to play it back. The 7th grade science teacher who has now been hailed as a hero for stopping that shooting in Indiana. There was a student with a gun. There was a state of confusion for several hours, and we didn't actually hear a report from officials for quite a while that day. But again, that was last week before the holiday. But he spoke at a news conference yesterday about what all went down and sort of what went through his mind as he was stopping this shooter that could have been a much worse situation at this Indiana middle school. So we're going to take a look at that. Again, we're keeping a look on what's coming in live here, so if anything changes, we'll bring that to you as well. But here's a look at Jason Seaman, who was the 7th grade teacher that stopped that shooting.
Our school community has sustained both physical and emotional injuries as a result of this. We are very thankful that there were no fatalities. That's due in large part to the quick action of our first responders, staff, and students. They followed our safety procedures and protocols effectively, and it's due especially to the heroic efforts of our teacher, Mr. Jason Seaman. Mr. Seaman has been a 7th grade science teacher and football coach at Noblesville West Middle School for 4 years. He's here to speak with you this morning about his experience. But first, you will also hear from our superintendent, Dr. Beth Niedermeyer, and Noblesville West principal, Ms. Stacy Swan. Please note that since this is an active investigation, and since as a school district we are prohibited from sharing specific information about students, we will not be able to answer all of the questions that you have. And in fact, we won't be taking any questions after the conference. So after the remarks are made, that will conclude the conference. I want to start out by introducing Dr. Niedermeyer, our superintendent of Noblesville Schools.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Beth Niedermeyer, and I'm the superintendent of Noblesville Schools. On Friday, we endured a horrific and senseless tragedy that had a significant impact on this community. But we're coming together to support one another in this time of need. I've seen tremendous kindness, strength, and resilience from this community, and we're all really grateful. I'm thankful that Jason, our teacher who is injured, is well enough to be here with us today. Ella, our student who is injured, is making progress, and she's surrounded by a loving family, friends, and a huge circle of well-wishers. Please keep her in your prayers during her recovery. The last few days, we've been working to tend to the emotional needs of our students, our staff, and our parents. We've been providing counseling services, and these counseling services will continue the rest of this week, into the summer, and into next year. That's an important part of the healing process. The outpouring of love and support that we've received from Noblesville community, the state, and the nation has been a source of strength and beauty during this ugly tragedy, and we're slowly starting to heal. We're here today to talk about the heroism that took place on Friday, and I could not be prouder of Jason, Stacy, and the entire Noblesville West staff, students, bus drivers, nurses, the list goes on. They all acted swiftly, they stayed calm, and they showed courage, and they followed all of our safety protocols. We're so grateful for Jason's quick and brave actions on Friday. He's a strong teacher, he's a coach, he's a father, he's a husband, and he's a son, and he's loved by many. He put his own life in danger for his students. That alone tells you about his character and his big heart. The entire Noblesville school family has come together to do whatever we need to do to deal with the aftermath of this crisis. They've demonstrated tremendous compassion and endless commitment and have given all of their time this weekend to make sure everything is ready for next week, for our last week of school before summer break. Together, we will get through this, and I couldn't be more proud to be a part of this school district and a member of this community. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Stacy Swan. I'm very proud and honored to be the face of Noblesville West Middle School. This community and Noblesville West will be forever changed by the events on Friday. We are eternally bonded in this. I am speaking today because I want everyone to know the examples of strength, courage, and bravery I witnessed on this morning. Several people found their purpose on May 25th, 2018. I would hope that everyone would find their purpose, but I pray that no one has to go and find it the way we did. Jason Seaman is a hero, no doubt, but he is only one of the heroes I saw on this day. Our own school nurse and resource officer were first on the scene and provided immediate medical attention. Our teachers reacted swiftly, boldly, to make essential calls for help. Others led groups of children through their own fears and led them to safety. And the reason why we teach, and most importantly, the students, they reacted confidently and courageously in following the training their teachers.
Guys, I want to take a quick pause on that press conference from yesterday. We are going to hear from that teacher who heroically saved some of those students at the middle school in Indiana. But right now, live coming up on one of our sources, the Golden State Killer, the serial killer, the man who is suspected of being one of the most elusive killers in history. He's in Sacramento County Court today, and we have the live video coming in right now. So we're going to hear from some of the lawyers who were there speaking with the judge. He did not enter a plea, and he was denied bail. Again, this is Joseph James DeAngelo, age 72. And we're going to hear what they have to say, the court officials and the lawyers in court with him today. So I just saw that come up. Let's listen in to what's going on inside that courtroom.
Again, I've heard that this is going to be years in the making, so that may not be necessary at all. But also another alternative that courts talk about is bringing in from outside of the county jurors to that juror panel.
Okay, thank you. I think all the parties agree this is an issue of balancing, the balancing of rights. Ms. Duffy has argued for the freedom of the information rights, but few rights are more important than the right to a fair trial. And with the intense amount of publicity that's going on in this case, if you release amounts of confidential information, that is a recipe for an unfair trial. So first I want to talk about the amount of publicity. We filed a declaration initially showing that there had been over 100 Sacramento Bee local newspaper articles issued in the 2 weeks after the arrest. That's over 50 a week. And if you average that out, that's more than 7 articles a day. The Associated Press said we hadn't proven that there was enough media publicity in this case. So I filed another declaration. And in that declaration, we established that there have been over 800 print articles in the month since Mr. DeAngelo's arrest. 800 print articles. That's 28 articles a day. If you look at TV and news and radio broadcasts, you're up to 280 a day. With the internet, you add on 16,000 internet articles in a month. And remember, this was a case that had a best-selling book even before the arrest of Mr. DeAngelo. Finally, I would ask you to take notice of the press that has literally today been knocking at the door to come in, who is here in court today, and who are the parties to this motion. The Associated Press, the LA Times, the Sacramento Bee, the San Francisco Chronicle, Hearst Communications, a mass media corporation with newspaper, magazine, and TV channels across the nation. Look who joined in, the New York Times, again showing that this is a national interest story, and then ABC News has also joined. The media coverage is immense, it's extraordinary. And you can be sure, Your Honor, that any information you give to the press will receive wide and detailed dissemination, probably repeated dissemination throughout California and throughout the country. So that leads me to the two concerns that the defense has in this case. Ms. Duffy did a thorough job of arguing about the jury influence. We are obviously concerned about influencing the jury. She suggests some measures which could take care of potential problems down the road, but it's impossible now to gauge what those problems will be and how significant they will be. It is easier now, before the cat is out of the bag, to keep that confidential information confidential and not prejudice jurors. But the second concern we have with releasing this information is the effect it will have on witnesses. Ms. Duffy, in her response, and Ms. Duffy in court today, argued that our media coverage has not been unfair, has not been inaccurate, but that misses the point. The concern is the effect of exposing witnesses to confidential facts. And for specifics, we refer you to our initial motion and in camera if necessary. So we have a grave concern that public disclosure will lead to unfair and inaccurate witness recollection at a trial, the fundamentals of a fair trial. Now, the district attorney will correct me if I'm wrong, but this investigation is far from over. There is a usually massive number of witnesses to literally hundreds of crimes or acts or events. And the law enforcement only first became aware of Mr. DeAngelo's alleged connection to this crime a few months ago. We have witnesses to events decades ago. Fading memories are going to be a huge issue in this case. Re-interviews of those witnesses are going to be crucial and provide crucial insight into what happened and what is remembered. And we don't want those witnesses tainted by information that comes out released by this court. There are going to be witnesses to modus operandi and corroborating facts that will be contacted again, and sometimes these witnesses will be contacted for the first time. We don't want witnesses knowing what the prosecution and law enforcement theory is of modus operandi and the activities, because that would taint witnesses, both new and existing, to recollections from decades ago. There's going to be a whole new investigation, and correct me if I'm wrong, again, regarding Mr. DeAngelo's history, where he lived, where he worked, what he did, what he said. That investigation could be tainted by information that comes out from these confidential affidavits. And then, of course, there's possibly new investigation into new crimes or new theories that could come about, and then again be tainted by this investigation, a release of this information from the investigation. Ms. Duffy, again, in her response, said we don't have any evidence of that. Well, we've provided the declaration of Dr. Jeffrey Loftus. He's a very esteemed member of the psychological community, and he put in his affidavit things that are of no dispute in that community. And that is that when you have an old memory, it can be tainted if you are provided new information. In fact, it's more likely to be tainted if it's an old and faded memory. And Mr. Loftus also said that once those memories have become infected or tainted, it's impossible for the witness to tell apart what was altered or fabricated. It's impossible for them to tell that, and they truly believe it, and will testify to that, and will stick to it under cross-examination. It's almost impossible to root out any taint once it has been set in a witness's mind. And the best way to prevent that is to not allow the confidential information that the district attorneys, law enforcement investigators stated was secret, was not publicly disseminated, and it would be improper to unseal it at that time. And I submit it's still improper to unseal it. There's another concern with releasing this information that's unrelated to the prosecution witnesses, and that is the defense witnesses. If the defense were to present witness of exculpatory information, and that witness were to testify about anything that had been disseminated by this court, that witness would be impugned with that information. You may have got that from the news. You may have got that from the newspaper. You may have got that from the search warrant affidavit. So a perfectly legitimate exculpatory witness will be impugned by the fact that this information is public. And again, that undermines the defense abilities, relates to a fair trial. The third comment I want to make about the balancing issue is the concern that Ms. Duffy put forward, besides general, generic, the public needs to know. The moving papers said that there should be information on how the genealogical websites were used. There's a lot of interest in how that went down, about privacy issues, about concerns of this, that, and the other related to the genealogical search. And I submitted in my first filing that there was no mention of genealogical websites, that the mention of discovering an alleged connection to Mr. DeAngelo was a sentence long, followed by a paragraph explaining follow-up DNA work. It's almost not mentioned. So their justification for being here today doesn't pan out. In summary, yes, we are concerned about tainting and prejudicing the jury pool. That infects the fact finders. But we're also very, very concerned about the impact releasing this information would have on any of the myriad of potential victims, witnesses, corroboration witnesses, modus operandi witnesses, law enforcement witnesses, civilian witnesses, infecting the actual process of the trial, the presentation of evidence itself. And so for that reason, Your Honor, we ask that you follow our proposed redactions.
So just to be clear, you're not asking the court to keep both of the aforementioned documents sealed in its entirety. You're recognizing probably on balance First Amendment rights versus defendant's right to a fair trial. Some of that information contained within those documents should be released. You're arguing for redaction.
I'm arguing for redaction, but as you'll see, that a lot of the document will be redacted, and the court can decide whether that makes it futile to release the remainder.
Yeah. I can tell you I wouldn't agree with keeping all of it under seal. I think there are portions that can be released, and in balancing the First Amendment rights, the public's right to know, versus Mr. DeAngelo's right to a fair trial. I don't believe all of that will remain under seal, but I just wanted to clarify that.
And you notice in our redactions that we didn't propose to redact the whole document.
That's what I'm asking. Okay, yes. People.
Thank you. Good morning, Your Honor. Amy Holliday and Tim Nevola on behalf of the people of the state of California. Your Honor, the people's request here is very narrowly tailored. We don't agree with much of what Ms. Carolyn has stated here in court. We are not seeking a wholesale sealing of these warrants. We're asking for a very narrowly tailored portions of the warrants to be redacted. The first things we would ask to be redacted are the personal identifying information of the victims, witnesses, law enforcement, and even of the defendant in this case. The case law is well settled in California regarding the privacy of victims. I'm sure the court did take notice in our proposed redactions that we're not seeking to redact the names of the homicide victims. I believe the family that Ms. Carolyn was referencing is in fact the family of a homicide victim, not that of a simple, or not a simple, but a straight sexual assault. The bulk of the names, as the court has reviewed in the warrants, are those of sexual assaults, and we have an interest in keeping those private. We don't have time, we weren't given time to go through the entire list of names and all the victims. That's going to be well over 75, and ask each of them individually. Any document that comes from the court, from law enforcement, we must follow the law in regards to privacy of victims. We're asking the court to do so. In regards to the further investigation, the people have set forth a very narrowly tailored request in what we are asking to be redacted. And in fact, many of these requests listed on page 3 of our brief are in fact duplicative between the arrest warrant and the search warrant, and really only covers 2 specific areas for the court to review. So we believe the people have narrowly tailored our request in the interest of the ongoing investigation. And with that, Your Honor, the people would submit.
Yes, Your Honor, just briefly, with respect to the witness memory and the taint, I read their expert's declaration, and I take that as a general phenomenon with respect to witnesses that would be generic to any case. Yet cases don't come to this court in hermetically sealed environments where siloed witnesses don't have any clue about what the case is about or what others may say. The parties themselves, counsel can cross-examine witnesses, can bring that out. They'll surely have experts to discuss that issue. A potential alternative would also be for the prosecution to tell witnesses to avoid media. accounts of the case and to maybe even record when they do have those accounts, so that'll be known to the defendant at the time that witness is perhaps cross-examined. So I don't think those generalized interests, which would appear to apply to any case, should carry the day in this case. Our interest, the public's interest, is far more than in understanding how genealogical websites were used. This case involves a collection of evidence from 1970 under standards that were applicable in 1970. So the public has a very keen interest in understanding how those standards are going to hold up and have hold up to justify an arrest and a seizure of evidence at Mr. DeAngelo's house. One point of clarification, which happened when I was here last week, we do understand that in addition to the search and arrest warrant, there are search warrants particular to a phone and a computer, and we were assuming, I didn't know at the time we brought our motion, that those were under seal, that this also pertains to those warrants and returns. I would assume they're supported by the same affidavits. I don't know if that is the case. But I would submit, Your Honor.
Okay. Response?
Submit.
A couple questions. One, in terms of the search warrant return, I make a differentiation between the affidavits themselves and the returns. I don't know, the parties did not seem to differentiate other than using the same methodology to their proposed redactions. Have the parties reviewed this case, OZIEL versus Superior Court? It's the Menendez murders in which a psychotherapist had his office searched. Reading that case, I'm not sure that releasing search warrant returns is proper in terms of what the fruits of the return were, but that's question number one. So I'll let the parties address that if necessary. And two, I'd like the parties to focus in on what I consider the crux of this argument to unseal, and that is the other crimes evidence that has been presented in the search warrant affidavit and probable cause. As I see it, the case in Sacramento County involves 2 counts of murder, Brian and Katie Maggiore. The search warrant affidavit, as indicated by the defense opposition, indicates the affidavits contain information on a large number of rapes and other serious crimes that the defendant cannot now be prosecuted for. Additionally, the affidavit contains other acts or other crimes evidence in other jurisdictions, which may include, or does include, homicide. So as I'm viewing this release, I'm also sensitive to those facts because my analysis would suggest that that other crime information would have to have some relevance to the charges in this case, firstly. Secondly, that information would be challenged undoubtedly by the defense under 1101B of the evidence code, and the prosecutor or the moving party, which I assume would be the prosecutor, can ask the trial court to allow those other crimes evidence in, providing it does not deal with character, as you all know, 1101 subdivision A, and B, it is used to prove some fact that may be of relevance to this case. So the analysis requires, A, is the evidence relevant to an issue in the case other than character? Does the evidence go to an issue of consequence in the case? Logically, does the evidence help prove the issue of consequence? Is there enough evidence of the, quote, other act for its purpose for which it is being offered? And is the probative value of the other act evidence substantially outweighed by its dangers of prejudice under 352? Clearly, nothing prohibits the admission of evidence that a person committed a crime or other act when relevant to prove some other fact, such as modus operandi, motive, opportunity, intent, preparation, plan, knowledge, identity. So as I'm reviewing these search warrant affidavits, I see a multitudes of other crimes evidence, unrelated, generally speaking, at this stage, which is early, to the 2 counts of murder in this case. So the concern I have, rightly or wrongly, that's why I'm raising it for the interest of the parties to respond directly, if you would, to releasing that other crimes evidence prior to its potential introduction may be prejudicial, because the public would read every instance, every act that occurred allegedly involving this defendant, may or may not be accurate, prior to a hearing. Because as the parties who practice criminal law know very well, in order to have 1101B evidence introduced, it necessitates a hearing in which those individuals will testify before a trial judge. The district attorney would have to show enough similarities with those other crimes to make it relevant to the 2 counts of murder in this case. So by releasing that information within the affidavit prematurely, and I would say this hearing probably would consider premature, we're early on, would that not tend to prejudice the defendant's ability to receive a fair trial? That is, to have 12 impartial jurors who either have some information about the case, but not extensively, and more importantly, have not prejudged the case that they're about to hear based on all of this other evidence that may not even become admissible. There may not even be those victims available. I don't know the strategy tactics being used in the case, nor do I need to know for my purpose, but it seemed relevant to me to consider those other crimes evidence may become important to the prosecutor to show a link to the homicides here. And if so, the only methodology to get that in would be extensive hearings, pre-trial, before the trial judge. So if my analysis is correct, how can the remedies suggested by the press overcome that? Or how can that ameliorate the concern that I have that it may be impossible or very difficult, I should say, to find 12 jurors who would not be so biased by the information that may not even become admissible at trial?
So let me address that, Your Honor, because there is a concern here that you're discussing what may ultimately be relevant at trial and the public's right of access based on what the court, the judge who issued the warrants, was looking at in granting the awesome authority of arrest and seizure of evidence. What the court looked at is what the public has a right of access to, both under the Constitution and under the statutory right. Courts have been very clear that the public's right of access is not limited to what may ultimately be deemed relevant at the time of trial. That's clear from the United States Supreme Court's determination in Press Enterprise 2 involving preliminary hearings. We know it's true from Waller versus Georgia involving the Sixth Amendment right to suppression hearings, where that may be the end game, where evidence and motions are heard about what ultimately may be considered, but there is a right of access, there's a right of a public trial to those proceedings. And even in the NBC California Supreme Court, although a civil case, that whole case involved sidebar conversations about admissibility of evidence. And the court said, whether it's in or whether it's out is an important part of a public's understanding of a case, whether or not the jury will ultimately hear that evidence. So this has been decided by courts. It's not a matter of what ultimately may be relevant at the time of trial. The public is not precluded from seeing only what the jury gets to see. That's been rejected by multiple courts. Given the general concern about what that information may be as far as prejudice, the court still has to say, okay, is this information about these other crimes so impactful that it's going to sear the memory of the entire county of Sacramento, such that it's difficult to seat 12 unbiased jurors. And frankly, in today's media landscape, I don't think it's going to be difficult 2 years from now, 3 years from now, whenever this case goes to trial, to find 12 jurors who have never heard of Mr. DeAngelo at all or have read any of this. And the court can clearly ask those questions, the parties can ask those questions to ensure that those people, people can hear of things and still be a member of a jury, but that they can't act fairly and impartially and set aside those, that jury knowledge and act fairly. So I would just caution, the road that you're going down about relevance is not one that the courts have adopted at all when it comes to the public's right of access. We get to see from the infancy when the judge issues an arrest warrant, the basis for that. The basis for that is all the evidence that the prosecutors and the law enforcement officers put into that affidavit to justify an arrest. The fact that it may involve another jurisdiction or a crime in another jurisdiction doesn't mean that it wasn't relevant to the probable cause determination. It clearly was, or it wouldn't be in there. I do understand that the court may have concerns about what other jurisdictions may feel about this. I don't know if the case is ultimately going to be tried in another jurisdiction or not, but still it's an evidentiary burden that's quite significant when you talk about not being able to find 12 jurors in Sacramento County.
How do you differentiate People v. Jackson?
People v. Jackson is...
Court sealed or kept, did seal the search warrant affidavit, the jury proceedings, and the indictment for the reasons set forth in that affidavit.
Right. So the court in Jackson repeatedly said that this was a unique set of circumstances. They even described the circumstances as sui generis in that case. We treat celebrity cases in this state like on a different level than any other type of cases. That case had worldwide prominence. The thought of an entertainer of worldwide prominence doing the acts that he was accused of, while the investigation had 60 warrants out, there were living victims who were minors. Those circumstances that created that atmosphere of that case are unique to that case. Also, that court relied on the Associated Press when it came to investigatory interests, and the Ninth Circuit has recognized post-Times Mirror that post-arrest cases are treated differently, that there is a constitutional right. So I think in today's environment, even that court may come to a different conclusion with respect to the investigatory interests that were asserted. But the Michael Jackson case, for people who do what I do, it is a completely unique case that applies to those worldwide celebrity type cases and the way we treat those cases as just a phenomenon in and to themselves.
Well, I read that case to stand for the nature of the charges were so explosive that if they were released publicly, it would be difficult to find 12 people. Just because it's simply the nature of the charges, the court was sensitive to redacting the names of the victims, unidentified co-conspirators. The court narrowly tailored his ruling, Judge Melville, to attempt to accommodate the press requests and realized it would become unintelligible to so heavily redact it, so he chose not to. That's how I read that case. I hear what you're saying. As to the point of the publicity, I recognize it ebbs and flows. At the beginning, there's intense media scrutiny. Whether that remains, it's going to ebb at some point. And then if this goes to trial at some point, it'll build back up, and then there'll be requests again like there are now to film the entire trial. So I recognize that. I also recognize that there are some methods available to the trial judge to inoculate those jurors. Just because a prospective juror has read some information about the case does not disqualify them. There's methods of questioning jurors. I've done whole v. voir dire. Individuals questioned voir dire on a case in which there was intense media publicity. There's no way to get jurors that have not been so prejudiced by the publicity. Those jurors that indicated a knowledge or remembrance of the events were questioned individually. Few of them really had sufficient knowledge that they could not serve on that jury. So I am sensitive to that. My issue, again, is like I said. The other case I looked at, and it's called Algrezza versus Superior Court. It's Allegrezzza versus Superior Court in 1975, 47 Calap 3rd, 948. And I'll just read portions of it because it seemed to be close to the issue I have glommed onto here. It says, the press and the public in general have no right to pretrial disclosure of a purported confession of a defendant awaiting trial for murder when the disclosure may deny the defendant a fair trial. In Allegrezzza, the murder charge against defendant had received widespread county publicity in the media. Defendant moved for a 402 hearing regarding the voluntariness of his confession, and he moved that that be held in camera. That motion was denied by the court. On petition for a writ of mandate, the trial court was found to have abused its discretion in denying defendant's motion. The quote from the case is, few things would more likely deny to him a fair trial of those charges than a pre-trial public media announcement and elaboration of a confession which for good reason is later denied acceptance in evidence. Weighing the constitutional value here at stake, the most fundamental of all freedoms, against the lesser and contrasting affront to the public right of informational access, that court concluded the Superior Court abused its discretion in its denial of an in-camera hearing on the issue of the voluntariness of the purported confession. And it says the court continues, Superior Court was not obligated to strike a proper balance between the First Amendment right of freedom of the press and the Fifth Amendment's guarantee of a fair trial. In the context of this case, the rights of the press are no greater than the rights of the public generally, and the public generally has no right to pretrial disclosure of questionable evidence, a disclosure which might well deny to the accused the fair and impartial trial which is his due. So I read that, and I'm thinking, I understand, but we're discussing a large quantity of, as I see it, other crimes or other acts that may or may not become admissible. I heard your argument, but do you have a response to that case?
Sorry, Your Honor, that case would not be decided the same today. The California Supreme Court NBC case resolving the right of access to civil cases, but relying on a whole body of criminal law was in 1999. The United States Supreme Court's decision in Press Enterprise, which attached the public trial right to preliminary hearings, was decided in 1986. So the right of access to criminal trials was in its infancy in 75 and was not fully formed until after the Press Enterprise 1 and Press Enterprise 2 determinations. And in addition to the Waller case, which deals with suppression hearings, there's also a Ninth Circuit Associated Press case that deals with suppression hearings, and again talks about the constitutional right of access to that stage of the criminal case, whether ultimately it's going to be admitted or not. So I would caution against relying on a 75 case pre-constitutional right of access to criminal trials.
Okay, Mr. Lewis.
No, I would just counter the Associated Press claim that the Jackson case was unique. I don't think it's unique in the terms of the press coverage that we're seeing in this first month here. And it's speculating to know whether it will die down or whether it won't. I could assert that it almost certainly won't, but I don't know, and neither does the court. But if it doesn't die down, that information, as I said before, is going to be widely and repetitively disseminated in the news media, and it's going to prejudice potential jurors. Also important, even if it does die down, right now is when the district attorney are interviewing these witnesses that haven't been interviewed in 20, 30 years, who haven't been interviewed for many, many years. And they're going to be talking to those people right at the time when, if this court releases sensitive information, that sensitive information will be splashed across headlines and placed in detailed websites for people to read, and will be, the public will be so immersed in it, it will be almost impossible to tell. The the Associated Press and the court even has talked about, particular forms of voir dire. It's one thing to find out whether a witness has read a best-selling book or not. They would know, and it would be easy to tell whether they had been influenced by that. But when we're talking about the wide amount of media coverage that this case is going to get, and these details on these crimes, these alleged 1101B, MO, common scheme or plan, that, as the court said, may or may not be accurate, that's going to be introduced in front of these witnesses, who are then going to be called on eventually to testify in a pretrial hearing and asked about whether there are any similarities. And those similarities, Your Honor, they could well have gotten from information that gets released today. So there's a two-pronged concern. If the court is sitting on the fence about concern for jurors, there is also a very large concern about the effect on the witnesses. As far as the different standards for the return versus the warrant, whatever standard you use, Your Honor, the things that were taken from Mr. DeAngelo's residence could be used, at least the ones we highlighted in our proposed redactions, could be used to influence and taint witnesses and change testimony and make the trial ultimately unfair.
Is it your view then that the return can be unsealed so long as portions of that, as you've indicated, remain sealed? Or is it your view that you did not see cases that authorized a search warrant return, evidence seized during the lawfully executed search warrant, to be released under a motion to release under proceeding?
Well, I believe that issue was first raised today by Your Honor, and I don't think the case was in the briefing, so I can't particularly answer that. But my point being is, at least what we've highlighted, whatever the standard is, should be excluded from the return and the affidavit.
Yes.
So just to make sure that I understand the return issue, because certainly there's no constitutional right to the actual physical evidence or to view that physical evidence. What the statutory right and the constitutional right attached to is the list that comes back. That's part of the statutory right. It has been. The search warrant materials include the list. They don't include the fruits, the actual physical evidence.
Right. That's within the jurisdiction of the court.
Right.
Ms. Holliday.
Your Honor, that is the people's position as well on the return. And as you noted in our response, we are seeking redaction of the return for the reasons stated. Other than that, Your Honor, we would
Can I ask all of it or portions of it?
All of it, Your Honor.
Okay. So it's your view that that is not in this?
Yes, because
cannot be unsealed, that portion.
Correct. The bulk of it is the list of the items as indicated by the court.
Okay. All right. As to the issue of the other crimes evidence, would you have any?
We would submit, Your Honor, based on our response.
Okay. Is there anything else?
No, Your Honor.
No?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, so what I should probably do before I issue my ruling is go in camera, I'm thinking, unless the parties say otherwise, because both sides, that is the people in the defense, have filed a proposed redaction. I need to review those. It's an in-camera proceeding. And then once I've reviewed those, I can tailor an order accordingly. So let me ask the attorneys here. The search warrant affidavit is lengthy, in excess of 7 pages. I don't know the extent of the argument that will be raised by both sides. So there's 1 or 2 ways to go. It's almost 10 o'clock now. I can recess, see how far we go till noon. I don't want to keep people waiting unnecessarily, but at the same time, this is what I would consider a thoughtful process, and it does take time. And I don't want people to criticize the process because we're not able in this age of social media to have a quick response. This is not a quick response. So I could adjourn this, and then we can resume at a different day if that's more convenient, or if you would want to just hang out, as they say, Ms. Caroline. Do you have a preference?
I prefer if the court has the time now to do it, I'd be happy to stay and be here for any questions that the court may have.
All right. So we'll see what we can do in 2 hours. Okay. So let's do that. So I need to then go in camera. So the easiest way to do that is to clear the court.
Thank you, Your Honor, very much.
Thank you.
If you guys are just joining us on the stream, thanks for hanging out with us here at Fox 5 Live. We're inside Washington, D.C.'s Channel 5 newsroom here. You're looking at the footage there of the alleged Golden State Killer, Joseph James DeAngelo. He's in court today. This is actually a continuation of the previous hearing in Sacramento Superior Court. Essentially, the media outlets made a request to have all search and arrest warrants made public. They wanted to allow the public to learn more about how that DNA genealogy website helped them determine that it was possibly this suspect here that you see in court behind those bars. That linked him to the killings and the rapings of those people in the area of Northern California. The defense is saying, hey, if you reveal this information, it might make it difficult for us to actually pick a jury, to seat a jury that doesn't have knowledge of this case before the trial. So kind of some interesting tidbits there. That's what we gleaned from that just now today. So that's what they're dealing with now. Media saying we want this stuff to be out there in the public. The defense saying if it is, it's going to be hard to actually formulate a jury to figure this out. In other news, let's take this back more locally, guys. I flashed this tweet across your screen just a few moments ago. This is the latest from Howard County Police. So we're jumping back over to Maryland, where they've seen the devastating flooding of Ellicott City, Maryland. That's outside of Baltimore. And right now, just a few moments ago, Howard County Police said that they found an adult male body in the river, or from searchers along that line of the river across the Baltimore County line. Police are still awaiting that identification to see if it is that man that went missing, who was part of some of the flood evacuation yesterday. So they're not quite sure yet. We're going to determine that, and we're going to hear from police hopefully shortly in a press conference. If that does come to pass, we're going to bring that to you live. So for now, guys, we'll be right back. We'll look for some other news that's coming in for us here on our live stream program.
should inspire and convince you that the children, staff, and responding officers will not only get through this, but will become stronger because of this. Someone shared a passage with me this week that stated, "The strongest trees have the deepest roots." This embodies not only Noblesville West, but the entire community. We showed that on Friday, we are stronger together, and we will continue to amaze you. I have never felt alone in Noblesville, but never has it felt so beautifully crowded than on that day. Thank you to each of you that offered refuge, safety, and support to the staff and students of Noblesville West Middle School. We will forever be grateful.
First off, as a person who isn't looking for attention nor entirely comfortable with the situation I'm currently in, I want to make it clear that my actions on that day, in my mind, were the only acceptable actions I could have done given the circumstances. I deeply care for my students and their well-being, so that is why I did what I did that day. In the last couple of days, I have heard story after story of how members of the Noblesville West family conducted themselves during that day, and I couldn't say enough times how proud of them I am, how they conducted themselves around students, given their own emotions and such. I need to give a special thanks to Officer Stephan. He was incredible throughout the entire process, the entire ordeal. I'm eternally grateful to have him in our building. Along with Officer Stephan, an unbelievably brave colleague, entered my room, was absolutely crucial in keeping Ella alert and calm as we waited for help to arrive. I can't say enough how proud of Ella I am and how we all should be. Her courage and strength at such a young age is nothing short of remarkable, and we should all continue to keep her in our minds as she continues to recover. My nurses at IU Methodist, along with the surgical team and everyone else responsible for taking care of me, did a fantastic job. They were unbelievable, very accommodating throughout the whole thing. Lastly, I must acknowledge the community. Their support has been first class the entire time. Community members have found numerous ways to support myself and my wife Colette throughout the process. They have done so while still allowing us to maintain our privacy as we continue to process what we're processing. I must give a special thank you to Jackson for starting the GoFundMe page. I can't really fathom how someone I have not personally met would do such an act of kindness, and how the Noblesville community has been so generous in their response to it. I'm still processing much of what has happened, but I can say with absolute certainty that I am proud to be a Miller. Thank you.
Okay, and just to reiterate again, we are not taking any questions today. We do thank you for joining us this morning. Mr. Seaman, we're not planning any individual interviews at this time. If that changes at some point in the future, I will let you know. I'll also mention that anyone looking to donate to the victims' families can do so through the Noblesville Schools Education Foundation. The link can be found on our webpage on the district website. And I also wanted to let you know that we'll be honoring Mr. Seaman and collecting donations for both victims' families at our high school baseball playoff game today at 10 a.m. It's being held at Dunker Field, 3025 Westfield Road in Noblesville. Thank you.
In other news from yesterday, guys, in case you missed it, Memorial Day, some of the follow from that, of course, there were ceremonies and parades across the nation, but right here in the nation's capital in D.C., we would be remiss if we didn't show you some of the fanfare from the Memorial Day parade. And a lot of it very solemn, very meaningful, and really memorializing some of the fallen of our armed forces, of course. And at the World War II Memorial, of course, that is one of the most attended, and it's one of the most really revered, I would say, monuments in DC. There was a wreath-laying ceremony, so I want to show you a clip of that from yesterday, just in follow of Memorial Day in general and in remembrance. Before we get to some of that breaking news, when we have any more information on that male body that was found in Ellicott City, Maryland, I believe police are going to work on either positively or negatively IDing him and then holding a press conference to talk about that and more updates on the flooding situation there in Baltimore. So when we have that live video, we're going to make sure we jump over right to that live report. But for now, over to this wreath-laying ceremony that took place yesterday in DC, right downtown at the memorial.
veterans, all who serve in the service of our country in the Air Force. And you're carrying your service song. Please stand to be recognized as the United States Navy Band playing Armed Forces Veterans. United States Army, rock! United States Air Force. United States Marine Corps. United States Coast Guard. United States Navy.
Well, guys, this does seem to be the news that we unfortunately were hoping was not the case, but Howard County Police have confirmed in this tweet that you see on your screen that the body of Eddison Hermond, age 39, who went missing during the Ellicott City flooding on Sunday, was found by searchers today in the river. This is a live look right now below my face, the aerial view. This is our chopper cam of searchers today across the Baltimore County line in that river, and you can see the waters are really swollen. The water, sort of those riverways, are swollen with the flooding, and you can see some of the damage there next to it. Unfortunately, our camera back in town on Main Street we don't have up right now, but if we do have more of that footage, we'll bring that to you. But again, some sad news here today where I believe they've connected the adult male that they found with this body confirmed to be Eddison Hermond, age 39. So we're going to bring you more as we have it. If we have some more news from officials or an official press conference resulting in this news, we'll bring that to you live here on Fox 5 Live. So again, guys, here is a look at the local hero that police have confirmed the body of, Eddison Hermond, age 39. He went missing during the Ellicott City flood this past weekend, and he was found by searchers today in the Patapsco River, just across from the Baltimore County line. And you can see there, this is the picture that we were using of him earlier on in the weekend. And next to him, just a horrible picture of some of the devastation, some of the cars and the mud and the flooding that was left as the waters came down and really devastated that area of Main Street. And his body was found in the river just over the county line. So we're going to hear more from officials in a little bit. But unfortunately, that chopper video is going away. So that's what we have of that situation. Continuing to develop, continuing to get more pictures in from that devastation. It's a really tragic scenario. Again, if some of you are from around here or you remember, same thing happened just a couple years ago. It's another resurgence really of this type of thing happening, this flooding in the Ellicott City area in Maryland. So that's near Baltimore, about 35 miles east of Baltimore. We're going to have more for you on Fox 5 Live. Sam is going to join later on coming up. We're going to end this stream in a little bit, but I do want to alert you guys, more stuff coming up later tonight. We're going to have follow on more of our social media outlets. All of our platforms will follow this. President Trump, he has a Make America Great Again rally in Nashville. We're going to be taking that live to our Facebook page. So be on lookout for that later in the evening if you want to watch that. We'll also follow more from Ellicott City, more of these aerials, more press conference as they come in, news conferences from officials, all the official word regarding this flooding. So we're going to leave here with this scene, unfortunately ending on sort of a tragic note here in the newsroom. But more live news to come to you as it breaks, guys. More video, anything else that's coming into our newsroom as we track the latest here on digital on all our platforms. As you know, you can follow us at Fox 5 DC on everything, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, all those platforms. You can check in with what's happening. And for now, I'm live in the newsroom, guys. Molly, Nevola, Sam Silver will be coming up in a little bit in the afternoon. So continue to follow us here for more. We're going to leave this up for just a second and bring you more aerials of what's going on in Maryland. You can see just the quaint little town there, Ellicott City. So unfortunate with how low they're situated and how they've been dealing with this. And a lot of them have rebuilt their businesses over the years after that flooding in 2016, and it just happened again. So we'll have to see what they decide to do next and what's going to happen to that beautiful little street and that area where those businesses are situated in that town. All right, more to come this afternoon, guys. We'll see you soon, and I'll see you again tomorrow for more Fox 5 Live.